In the previous lesson, we added the React Switch package to our project as an NPM dependency. And in this lesson, I want to utilize the switch component from that library to replace the two buttons we have at the top of our user form, the login button and the sign up button. So instead of having two buttons, the user is going to have a single toggle that will switch back and forth between the login mode and the registration mode. So the functionality of our form is going to be pretty similar, but we're now going to get practice with using other people's components and also integrating those components with the state logic of our own app component. So let's begin by importing the switch component. It is the central or default export of the React Switch library. So right here, I'm going to import switch with a capital S from React-switch. So because the component is the default export of this library, we could technically call this whatever we want, but whatever name you give it, it's important to start it off with a capital letter, because whenever you render a component within JSX, that component must start with a capital letter. So if you want to call it my switch or the switch or toggle, totally fine. You just have to make sure you assign it a name that starts with a capital letter. In this case, I'm going to use switch. And down below in the render method in the JSX, I'm going to remove our two former buttons. We no longer need them. And I'm just going to render a single self-closing switch React component. We render it the exact same way that we would any other component within our own application. And it really is as simple and as elegant as this. And on the right-hand side, we see we now have somebody else's code, somebody else's component directly being rendered right here. Now you'll notice if I click it, nothing is going to happen. I believe it is actually draggable, so you should be able to drag it back and forth. But regardless, this isn't really the design that we want, either stylistically or from a click-based perspective. However, it is a good starting point, and we're going to be able to customize the behavior of the switch component by passing it various props, which we'll do in just a moment. Before we get there though, what I want to do is surround both sides of the switch with a label so we can communicate to the user what each side of the toggle represents. Because now there's really no indication which side of this toggle is login mode and which one is registration mode. As a heads up, the way this toggle is designed, it's really meant to be used more for the idea of turning something on and off. And the way it's designed is the toggle being on the left-hand side is an indicator that it is on or off, apologies. And when you move it over to the right, you'll notice that it becomes green and has that check mark. And that is the switch's indication that it is on. So it models an off and on relationship. In our case, our example isn't really fitting of off and on. Our two modes of the form are not similar. They're just two alternative formats that the form can be in. So we're going to get rid of things like the check marks, and we're going to have the green background on both sides of the toggle. So regardless of whether this thing is on the left or right, we're just going to have a green background on the remainder of the toggle, and the user is simply going to be able to click on it and it'll go to the other form, right? It's not really off and on. It's more just switching between different formats. But we still need to communicate to the user what those formats are. So here, I'm going to add a label, and I'm going to give it the text register. And so now we have that text to the left of the switch, and I'm immediately going to apply a couple classes here, or actually just one. I want to blow up the font size of that register text. So I will make this text-XL. That just applies a font size of 20 pixels. And I'm going to copy and paste this label and put it immediately after the switch and change this text to be login. So now we have both sides of the switch surrounded with a communicative name. But I do want to center this a little bit so it looks a little bit more nicer. And the way I'm going to do that is on the top level div that is now housing those children, I'm going to add a Tailwind class of justify center. That will apply justify content set to center, which will center all of the Flex children. And now we have everything located right in the middle. All right, so we are making good progress. The next thing we need to do is to customize the props that we're going to pass to this switch to customize how it looks. So the first thing I want to do is change the backgrounds of the toggle to not have those marks. You can see right here, there is that X. And when I move it into the on mode of the switch, we have that green check mark. That is the on mode. And I'm going to turn both of those off. And I can do that with two different props. The first one is going to be checked icon. And I'm going to set that to false. And the second prop is going to be unchecked icon. And I'm also going to set that to false. And that's just going to ensure that neither side of the toggle is going to give us any kind of marks or check marks or icons in the background, as we can see here. As I also mentioned, I want it always to have a green background regardless of what mode we are in. So in order to do that, I'm going to add an off color prop right here. Off color just allows us to specify the color that we see when the switch is in off mode, which is what it is currently in the design. So rather than having that gray color, I'm instead going to pass a code representing the exact same green that it has in the on mode, and that is going to be hashtag 080. So now you'll see it's going to have the exact same green color regardless of what form it is in. All right, so there's two more props that we need to worry about. The first one is going to be called checked, and that is going to be a Boolean that we can pass in that is going to represent whether the switch should be checked or not. This is sort of how the component is giving us control on whether it should be rendering with the on mode or the off mode, or alternatively, checked means that that toggle is going to be on the right. So for example, if I pass in true here, we can see the toggle is on the right. And if we pass in false here, you can see it's going to be on the left. Now this value, of course, is not going to be set with a hard-coded Boolean. Rather, it's going to be dependent on the format of the form that we are in. So if we are in login mode, then this should be set to true. And if we are in registration mode, then checked should be set to false. That's how we're going to make this component, which really resembles an on-off structure. That's how we're going to make this component fit with our state logic. And luckily, we have a perfect Boolean already, which is login mode, which is going to enable us to have that dynamic Boolean, that true or false that we need to tell the switch what it should be. So right here, I'm going to pass in login mode. We already have that state property destructured on line 20. And remember, each time it changes, the component will re-render. So if login mode is true, we are in login mode. So we're going to pass the checked prop true, which means this will be on the right-hand side. And if we re-render the component and login mode is set to false, which means we are in registration mode, then checked will receive the new updated value of false, and the toggle will be on the left, right next to the registration label. And that is exactly what we want. So the problem with this design is everything looks good. You can see we are in login mode, but we're not actually wiring up our state to change anyway, because our former methods right here, handle login click and handle signup click, are not actually connected to any part of the switch. These are now two unused methods. And in order to be able to customize how the switch is going to react to being clicked, we can provide it a special prop called OnChange. And again, these props are all defined by the developers of this library, but they're trying to maintain a consistency with how regular events work in React. So the switch component gives you an OnChange prop, and as you might expect, it expects either a function or a method that will execute when the user changes the switch. In other words, when they click on it. So what I'm going to do is reference a method, and we'll define it in just a moment. So right here, I'm going to say this dot, and the method name is up to us, and I will assume we're going to have a method called handle mode change. Unlike our previous implementation, we do not need two methods. We're just going to need one, and I'm going to call it handle mode change, right? So I'm going to remove our former code right here. We no longer need these two methods. We're going to need one method that basically does the same thing. It's going to set the form or the login mode state into the next value that it should be, which should in turn re-render and force the switch toggle to be in the correct format, right? So we called the method handle mode change. So that's exactly what we're going to call it up here. We're going to once again use the equal sign and the arrow function syntax to make sure that this keyword is binded correctly. And you might be curious, how do we know what the value currently is? Is the form on, is the form off, etc.? Well, whenever the switch component invokes the method that we provide here, it's going to give us a parameter called checked. To be more specific, it's going to give us an argument, and the parameter name is up to us. But this check parameter is going to be a Boolean, and the switch component is going to tell us whether the component is transitioning to being off, which means unchecked, or on, which means checked. So let me show you how this is going to work. I'm going to console log the value of checked right here. I'm actually going to put it in an object syntax just so we can see the check property appear in the object. So I'm going to open my console. Let me refresh this. Those errors were just when we were previously iterating. So you can see our login mode at the very start of the component's existence is set to true, which means we have the checked prop set to true, which means the toggle is on the right-hand side. Now, when I click this, I'm going to do that right now, you can see it's going to give us the next version of the switch component state. Remember, this is operating in an on-off paradigm. So within the switch components world, on means checked and off means false, right? So once again, to repeat, because it might have been confusing, when it's checked, that is equivalently on, and it's going to give us a true. And when it's becoming unchecked, it's going to give us a false, which is equivalently off. So whenever this method runs, the switch component is going to give us its next state, its upcoming state. We just clicked on it when it was on, so the switch component is telling us the next thing is going to be checked equal to false. And that, luckily for us, corresponds with the next value that we want to set for our login mode state property. Our login mode is set to true, so when the user clicks this, we have a check property that looks like this, false. So we want to take that false and set it to be the next value of our login mode state property. So right here, I'm going to call setState. The property that I want to update is going to be specified on my object, which is login mode. And then what I want to set as the value of my login mode state property is whatever Boolean the switch component gives to me that is represented now by my checked parameter. So whatever that Boolean is representing the next state of the switch component, either it's going to be false when it's off or true when it's on, I'm going to set that to login mode. Once again, it's a little bit of a complex example because we are trying to model a either or relationship when the switch component is really built for on off, but the dynamic is still going to work for us. If it's checked is set to false, we're going to set login mode to false. If checked is set to true, we're going to set login mode to true, and that is going to work with the UI we have in the browser. So save that, and now everything should work. So you'll notice we'll start off with login mode set to true. So this is going to be on the right. When we click this toggle, we're going to trigger the handle mode change method to run. At that point, checked will be set to false, right? So we're going to set the state for login mode to be false. That will force a re-render. So now when React runs through this code again, login mode is set to false, which means right here, the checked prop of switch will receive an updated login mode value of false, which will automatically force it to render the toggle on the left-hand side. Then when we click it again, the process goes in reverse. So now when I click it again from registration mode, the handle mode change method will run with a checked parameter set to true. The switch component is communicating that the next state of the switch component is being checked. It is in a checked mode, which is true. So we're going to take that Boolean of true that is checked, and we're going to set the login mode state property to be true as well. That is an update to state, which means we force a component re-render. So login mode is back to being true, which means we get all of these updates right here for greeting and text. And in regards to the switch component, the checked prop is now equal to true, which means the toggle appears on the right-hand side. If the checked is set to true, the toggle is on the right. If the checked is set to false, the toggle is on the left. So now everything should be working exactly as expected. We can go back and forth between these two different formats, and now quite a few things are changing. Basically everything within our white box. The switch is re-rendering itself to show the toggle in the new correct location. The welcome text or the we're glad you're here text is updating each render as well, and so is the text within the button. So just about every detail of this app component is changing every single time the login mode state property changes as well. All right, so pretty cool stuff. So with that, we are good to remove the console log right here. And this is a good place to finish off this section and review everything we learned in the very next lesson. So hope you had fun learning more about how state works in React, and I will see you in the summary in the very next lesson.